Good evening and welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast.
I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sainsbury.
Well, a happy New Year.
Happy New Year, mate.
I guess at what point is it too far into the year to stop saying it? But it's our first podcast back after an extended Christmas break. So thanks to all of our listeners who have tuned in, and we'll hopefully get the year off to some kind of big party.
Well, yeah, we quite often talk about party politics on the show, but this week, I guess we are, but in a more literal sense.
It's more the politics of parties than. So it is. It's been an extraordinary few weeks. Often we expect things just to quieten down over Christmas, and I guess to a greater or lesser extent they have. The fans, the flames of Partygate seem to die down and flare up periodically. So we'll have a good dig into that this week. And then a sports feature, not one we have especially often on the pod, mostly due to, it must be said, your somewhat thin grasp of sport. It wouldn't be your top choice, would it, in a general knowledge quiz?
Not really. No. I'm not a sports kind of person.
Yeah. So we've been looking across to the land of nature's gifts of beauty, rich and fair, Australia, and our chum Novak Djokovic? Both, and we'll give a kick around that. And then if there's time at the end, we've got a build your own story, and we'll look at the likes of Next and IKEA, who are changing their policy on sick pay. So a whole host of mostly COVID-related fun, but then it seems to be the only gig in town at the minute.
It does, but who knows? Maybe some stuff about IKEA will give us instructions about building a cabinet, and then that might be something that someone needs to do soon.
Oh, that's very good. That is very good. Very good.
I
do like that. I'm a big IKEA fan. I've built more IKEA stuff than you can shake a stick at. And despite not being able to see, I've now got this ability where if I can feel the thing in the store, I can build it. It's to watch. It's like that. It's like that Lionel Richie video with a big old plasticine head. It's stunning to behold. But anyway, we digress.
We do. To me, it's just like Argos for grown-ups, really. It's just that exciting place, but then you go downstairs and it's really kind of miserable. Anyway, we move on. So, okay. So each time we went to research this, and this is kind of maybe much the case that that Sue Gray's going to find is each time you think that you've looked at all you need to look at this, something else comes up, and there's another one.
It does have a touch, doesn't it, of the old Columbo. Just one more thing.
Just one more thing, Mr. Prime. I don't even know what accent that's meant to be, but basically, just one more thing. So I'm gonna go through. We're not going to do it with like any top 10 music, but we're going to go through a list that's been culminated from news reports that have either been on the Guardian, the Independent, the Times, the Sunday Mirror, BBC, Sky News, or indeed from nationalworld.com. So we've done a bit of kind of squeezing things in together and a bit of condensing it down. 23rd of March 2020. The country is in a strict national lockdown, and non-essential high street businesses are closed, and people are ordered to stay at home and allowed only 1 hour's exercise outside per day, but allowed to leave home for essential purposes, i.e. to care for someone else or to get food. If we can cast our mind back, that's the kind of that's the sort of time when the PM was saying many people will sadly lose members of their family before their time, kind of stuff. There was that really kind of damning. This feels like the start of a disaster movie kind of thing. 10th of May 2020, people were allowed back to work if they couldn't work from home but were told to avoid public transport. The 13th of May 2020, people were allowed to leave home for outdoor recreation and could meet a whole one other person outdoors as long as they were socially distanced.
And thus far, everything you've described doesn't say party to me.
No, but I'm setting the scene. So
oh no, I see a painting. Word and pictures. Beautiful. Keep going.
Yes. So the 15th of May 2020, according to The Guardian and The Independent, the PM is reported to have joined a gathering for Number 10 staff with the PM in attendance for 15 minutes. He said that Number 10's response when questioned about this was that staff deserved a drink for beating back coronavirus. I'm pretty sure the collapsing members of staff in the NHS felt they probably were worthy of a tot of rum themselves. Some 20 staff drank wine and spirits, followed by pizza. We don't know which pizzas or whether it was Wokingham pizza or whether any members of the royal family were involved. But some were in the offices in Number 10 and some were in the garden. This was the same day that hours earlier, Health Secretary Matthew Hancock had basically been calling on the public to stay home as much as possible. 20th of May 2020, Number 10 staff are invited to a socially distanced drinks while the country was still in its first national lockdown. An email has emerged inviting 100 staff to attend and to, quote, make the most of the weather. An hour earlier, Culture Secretary Oliver Dowden had given a Downing Street press briefing, telling people that they could only meet one person outside of their household or their bubble in a public place, but only if social distancing was maintained, and that came to light this month.
And I think from memory, there were a number of published responses to that one from the invitees that said, kind of along the lines of, is this for real? You know, are you mad? And I think of the 100 that were invited, I think about 30 turned in.
Yes. So that was, because some of the comparisons that have been published have been Home Secretary Priti Patel being quoted as saying, if I knew that my neighbour was breaking the COVID rules, then yes, I absolutely would report them. And then this. So that was the 20th of May. And then if we skip ahead until the 13th of November, with a tear in his eye, Dominic Cummings left Number 10 carrying his big box of secrets and where all the bodies were buried, claiming that a Downing Street party took place a party in the Downing Street flat took place that evening after he had left. Why they would celebrate him leaving, I'm not sure. But Number 10 has denied this took place. So 25th of November, the Times reported that an impromptu drinks with 24 civil servants who'd come into work on the autumn spending review took place at the Treasury while the country was still in lockdown. So these were people that had come into work on the spending review, but hung about to have some drinks. 27th of November, the PM is reported to have made a speech at a staff leaving party while the country at that point was in its second lockdown. And the 14th of December, the Times reports that in the bowels of the Conservative Party HQ, mayoral candidate Sean Bailey partied with at least 24 staff and volunteers. There were indeed some pictures of the catering equipment and the food, and people basically in a posing in a crowd. Disciplinary actions were taken against the 4 Conservative Party HQ staff that were seconded to the campaign. And Mr. Bailey has since stepped down in his role as chair of the London Assembly Police and Crime Committee. December the 15th, 2020, a picture emerged of the PM in front of a laptop in the Number 10 library. seems innocuous. You'd kind of you'd think, but sources report that staff were drinking. So basically, the virtual quiz took place. But there are reports that staff were drinking and were huddled around computers in order to answer the questions. But again, these were staff that were in the office that day, so this wasn't necessarily a separate event. It was something tagged on to the end of a working day. But the rules at the time say that work parties should not take place. And apparently the PM was a quiz master for one round, but we have no reports of what the scores were and who won.
Yeah, or even what his specialist subject was.
December 16th, according to the Mirror, the Department of Transport staff held a Christmas party in Whitehall. And although Grant Shapps, who was the minister at the time, was not reported to be in attendance, a spokesperson later said that, quote, fewer than a dozen staff who were working in the office had a low-key, socially distanced gathering in the large open-plan office after work where food and drink was consumed. We recognise this was inappropriate and apologise for the error of judgment. Again, this was at a time when the country was basically being told not to do things like that. 17th of December, Cabinet Secretary Simon Case's staff took part in a virtual quiz. Now, remember that name because he comes up later on. With the 6 people who were due to be in the office taking part from there and others taking part virtually from home. Again, sounds quite innocuous. But later that evening, Mr. Case's own staff had a gathering in his private office. There's no report that he was present, but so that same evening at the end of the working day, Kate Josephs had leaving drinks with staff in the office in the part of government that she worked in to mark that she was leaving her position as Director General of the COVID task force. So you'd kind of think that people like that would have some sort of idea about what was going on. Apparently, she'd left government to become the chief executive of Sheffield City Council. I'm sure they're proud. 18th of December, we're nearly there, Ian. Just days after London went into Tier 3, so that people could only mix indoors with members of their own bubble or their own household. Around 40 members of staff at Downing Street were at a cheese and wine evening, or what's been described as a cheese and wine evening, which carried on until small hours with Secret Santa gifts being exchanged and Downing Street Director of Communications Jack Doyle handing out awards and giving an address to staff. It is this event that was the subject of the mock press conference performance that Allegra Stratton was caught on video and then subsequently resigned the day after those revelations became public. On the 20th of December 2020, London is in Tier 2 by this point, so indoor mixing was banned, and Permanent Secretary of the Department of Education Susan Ackland-Hood confirmed a party was held at the Department of Education, which was attended by the then Secretary of Education Gavin Williamson. Whether he feels that she should shut up, go away, we obviously can't know at this point. We've got no quote. April the 16th of 2021, there are reports of not one but 2 different leaving parties taking place on the same day at Downing Street in different parts of the building. The night before the funeral of Prince Philip, so the country's in mourning. We're treated, obviously, to the solemn pictures of Her Majesty the Queen in St George's Chapel, sitting alone, obeying the COVID restrictions at the time at his funeral. So around 30 Downing Street staff joining in with this event. The 2 different parties actually ended up merging in the garden at Downing Street, with reports of one member of the staff acting as an impromptu DJ, and indeed it being such a restrained event that someone damaged the swing that belongs to the PM's son. And someone had to be dispatched to the local co-op to procure a suitcase full of wine. I mean, at least they weren't using any single-use plastics as the carriers. The PM at the time was in checkers. So that's the kind of the list of this is what we know so far, or this is what's been reported so far. Now, interestingly, the investigation that the PM mentions is going to be led now by Sue Gray. So she will report in the next week or so to the PM for the PM to decide whether any action should be taken, or indeed whether the report should be handed over to the police. And the Metropolitan Police have decided that they won't investigate anything until someone that works for the accused government has finished their investigation. But interestingly enough, the person doing the investigation was originally meant to be Cabinet Secretary Simon Case, but he was taken off the case because of the aforementioned party that took place in his own office in December.
Yes, he had found his face in a case of wine, it would seem.
Well, the reports don't indicate that he was at that party.
Right.
But perhaps at some point, early on in him being appointed as the investigator, someone in his office should have said, boss, just this thing.
Sorry, Gov. I don't know how to break it to you.
This political hand grenade is going to blow up in your political face in a second. So yeah, that's kind of where we are. Did you want to kick that about a bit before we hear what the PM said in PMQs on Wednesday, or should we go with with the PM?
Well, let's kick it about a little bit first, because for me, there's very much a picture there, isn't there? And it is when you look at it collectively, it's wince-worthy, isn't it? Because it's just and another thing, and another thing, and another thing. But they are actually all different things. And, again, without going down an apocryphal route, there is an element of they are shades of grey, aren't they? There is an element of, there is
the pun.
Well, yes. There is, for me, there is a difference between if you're all working in the same office and at the end of the working day, you crack a few tinnies. That is breaking the letter of the law, spirit of the law, perhaps. I'm a bit more sort of, okay with that one, although it's been a very long time since I was in a workplace which would allow the consumption of a few tinnies on site, but that might just be, I might be in the minority. But you've got that all the way through to, this is a full-on, the one in April. This is two leaving dues which have come together to be a right royal lash up, and somebody needs to go to the co-op to get another suitcase of wine. You've lost all perspective at that point, and I think the thing that there are so many things that trouble me about it, but it just feels like there's an elitism within what they call the Westminster Village, which is a mixture of MPs and the majority of civil servants who've got just this air of, yes, I know, the rules are the rules, obviously, but we've got a bit of latitude to be a bit flexible. And I think that arrogance is what is coming, it pervades that whole list that you've just read out.
It is, and obviously it's clear from the list that no one's pretending that the PM was present at all of those.
No.
But nonetheless, these take place in his official residence, and there will be his heads of department, etc., and his ministers that would have. It reaches beyond credibility to think that no one knew that these things were happening, and it's almost actually worse if they were incompetent enough to not know that these things were happening. So,
and one thing that struck me in this, sorry, just to cut in there, is how big is 10 Downing Street?
Well, it is. I mean, despite kind of what it looks like on the TV, as it looks like it. Obviously a relatively large terraced house. But actually, when you look at it on Google Maps, or you look at it, it is actually quite a large complex. It's actually a complex. It's effectively a mansion of connected buildings. So in that respect, it isn't a case of hang on, is that a work party, Ian? I can
I thought it was only appropriate that seeing as I'd be breaking no rules, and let's face it, this is not going to be the easiest podcast I've ever had to chew my way through for my team.
No, okay, all right. We'll allow you to reach for a tinny, but yeah, it's not the same as I'm not being funny. You're living in a 2 up, 2 down, and you're not being funny. You know what your neighbours are having for what they're watching on telly. Nonetheless, it reaches beyond the possible of excusable to be able to kind of say, well, this was happening in a part of the building, and no one that I knew about it, and to constantly being asked about it and saying these things didn't happen. But we're getting they did happen. Okay, well, if these things happen, I'm absolutely sure that social distancing took place and all rules were followed. And then to say, but we've got reports that didn't happen, and actually you were at some of them. Was I? Well, I'm sorry. How drunk do you have to be at a party to not know that you were even there?
Well, some say that the best parties are the ones that you don't remember, but I think in this case there is an element of and I think it's why it is playing out so very, very badly. Because there is an element of, there's an old adage, isn't there? When finding yourself in a hole, stop digging. But there is an element of, it seems like the Westminster machine thinks that we can, no, it didn't happen. Well, here are the pictures. Oh, and there's still that kind of, for me, I don't, and I guess it's always been my kind of, I've had the concern for years about the way in which bad news is managed. And I use that in quotes, because for me, after the first, and let's face it, this is being very cleverly orchestrated, because somebody has got all of these cards and is playing them one by one. And so pre-Christmas, when the Christmas party cards were being played, the sensible person would have got the full disclosure, would have got everything out in the open, and would have buried the story over Christmas. I know that sounds awful, but from a political standpoint, you would have, the sensible person would have done that. And what it feels like is a conversation's gone on that says, right, we've been caught there, but I think we'll be all right with all the other ones we know about.
Yeah, I'm just sorry. It just beggars belief that I don't know what, because it plays like arrogance. It feels like arrogance to think these things are happening and we can get away with it and people will forget it. They will move on. But yeah, it is an interesting thing that obviously these things may have just suddenly come to light in the media, but obviously someone, or whether that's some people in the media or whether there's someone behind the scenes carefully orchestrating that, is dripping this stuff out. So it's almost a political death of 1,000 cuts.
Yeah.
But it's not the act that gets you, is it? It's the lie that gets you. And what's being exposed here is Boris Johnson is being exposed repeatedly, which, to be honest, to anyone who isn't one of his fans, it isn't a shock. He's being repeatedly exposed as a liar. On one level, it's almost like, well, I'm sorry, but a leopard doesn't change his spots. If you book a tourist sightseeing trip to go see manatees and then complain that you don't see enough dolphins, this is, unfortunately, people have chosen to ride this horse for good or for ill. And it's not a surprise that he would behave this way to probably lots of people that were never really fans of his. But nonetheless, he is the Prime Minister of our country. Sorry, Tim's just pointing out in the comments that my the sheen of my colour appears to be to have a political hue to it. Actually, my jumper is a kind of like a peachy salmon colour, and it's just that the way the lighting works, that it looks like my background is a yellowish tint, but it's honestly not. But it's honestly, there's no party politics in kind of my statement, but we'll get to some of the party political nature of it later on. But
the thing is,
you can get away with it.
Well, if you look at the list, it's not all him. You know, there is stuff outside of him, but there's an element of, you know, good leadership. It is you know, when this starts to break, you get all of your trusted lieutenants around you, and you go, look, this is really going to hurt us unless we can take control and manage it. So, you know, full disclosure, let's get all of the dirty laundry on the table now. Let's not just hope that it's going to go away. And I know there's going to be some uncomfortable things, but I want to know them all now. But it doesn't feel like that's happened. There's and again, it's that whiff of arrogance that's blah, 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 you know, blah, 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 something over nothing, blah, 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 blah. And it's just that feeling that if I just hold my nose for long enough, the stench will go away.
Indeed, and the crazy thing, I mean, people often talk about kind of the dead cat tactic of there's really damaging stuff kind of happening, or really important stuff that's happening. So you put something kind of explosive or inflammatory kind of out that really in the long term doesn't really do any damages, but just distracts people from, oh, don't pay attention to this thing over here. Oh, look, a shiny thing. And you know, there are some things going on. Obviously, you know, there's the trouble in Ukraine. There's the issues about, you know, about revelations about Chinese influence at the heart of government, and all sorts of other things kind of coming down the track. But there are, this thing just doesn't. I mean, it quieted down over Christmas. So obviously, someone took some time off to spend some time with their family, and decided kind of to leave it alone. And to be fair, while there's no politics going on, there's also no political media around. Yep. So there's no point releasing it while there's kind of nothing happening. So that's probably why it went quiet over Christmas. But now we're kind of back to we're kind of back to this Groundhog Day of just what's next. And if you were you know, at the end of the day, a political party exists to win elections and to gain government, to be able to put in place the policies they believe that are the right things for the country. A prime minister or any politician is only good all the time they're not damaging the brand, all the time they're not a distraction from getting things done. Distraction is all right if that's distracting things from going tits up. And actually, we don't want you to look at that. Look at this buffoonery. Look at this. Can't brush his hair. You know, all that sort of stuff. I don't care whether the guy can brush his hair or not. I care about him lying to Parliament. I care about him lying to the country. I care about him deceiving people and thinking that that's an okay thing to do. I think that's a disgraceful thing for any politician to do. And especially our Prime Minister. The country deserves better. And I don't think actually most people, regardless of what political party they're in, will disagree.
Shall we see what the lad had to say for himself?
Yeah, let's and here he is down from London. No, we've got a recording from PMQ's that was on the BBC Parliament channel. So here he is, the PM himself. This is his response to PMQ's.
Mr. Speaker, I want to apologise. I know that millions of people across this country have made extraordinary sacrifices 18 months. I know the anguish that they have been through, unable to mourn their relatives, unable to live their lives as they want, or to do the things they love. And I know the rage they feel with me and with the government I lead when they think that in Downing Street itself, the rules are not being properly followed by people who make the rules. And though I cannot anticipate the conclusions of the current...
Oh,
That paused and it shouldn't have done. Hang on, let me see if I can get that back. We're not pausing for another revelation. Hang on a second.
No.
Sorry about this.
I have learned enough to know that there were things we simply did not get right. And I must take responsibility. Number 10 is a big department with the garden as an extension of the office, which has been in control of fresh air and stopping the virus. And when I went into that garden just after 6 on the 20th of May 20, to thank groups of staff before going back into my office 25 minutes later to continue working, I believed implicitly that this was a work event. But Mr. Speaker, with hindsight, I should have sent everyone back inside. I should have found some other way to thank them. And I should have recognized that even if it could be said technically fall within the guidance, there would be millions and millions of people who simply would not see it that way. People who suffered terribly, people who were forbidden from meeting loved ones at all, inside or outside. And to them and to this House, I offer my heartfelt apologies. And all I ask is that Sue Gray be allowed to complete her inquiry into that day and several others so that the full facts can be established. And I will, of course, come back to this House and make a statement.
What you thought?
it's kind of.
Listeners, Ian is lost for words. I'm
not
glad we are
lost.
recording this moment. Ian is not often lost for words. Let me,
I think-
while you
I
gather
think
yourself.
the internet has failed.
Yeah,
Oh,
okay. You're not
God.
frozen. I can still see you.
Yeah.
While you gather yourself, let me go through some of the comments. So Paula points out in the live stream comments that obviously it's not just the PM. There are other people that didn't report, that they didn't whistleblow, didn't say that this
Yep.
was happening. So whether that's the people there or whether that's the people that were invited and didn't go. There would still be people that there. So it isn't just one of them in one of these events should have said something. Why didn't they? Katz points out that personally she doesn't care how they socialised. Each is knowing what they are doing and the risk of it being exposed. But she can't imagine anyone admitting they breached the rules. There are far more important things to debate. Media storm again, whipping up people's feelings and senses of justice. Nothing political about it. Lynn remarks about the statement being we. The bells are tolling about it being we, and then it being a load of bollocks, basically. Paddy comments, 10 Downing Street makes it sound small. The place is vast, a few hundred staff. Conference centre is much more close to the point. Tim comments, Boris's problem is cumulative, though. It's not individual failings. Eventually, there's a tipping point created by an inconsequential item, which becomes the final straw. And some of the comments we got elsewhere from our posts sharing about today. We had Alex who said, of course, he should resign. Any politician with any decency or an ounce of respect for their people would, which is why he won't. Heidi said, no, he shouldn't. Martin said that he's misled Parliament. Kevin said he will be gone either way. His own MPs will throw him out when they think he's losing them votes, which he has started to do. And kind of it goes on It goes on like that, and they're kind of like some similar kind of comments to that. Leah says, "No, better the devil you know." So that's kind of a as actually, is there anyone better out there? So there's a kind of a kind of a segue on that we were kind of hoping to move to, of kind of, so what happens now? Like that song from Evita.
Oh, so what happens now? Take your picture from another wall. So what happens now? Take your suitcase from another hall. Where am I going to?
Another suitcase full of wine in another
Yeah.
hall. So
I've not done bad to pull the lyrics. You've not given me a heads up on that one.
We've done well. We didn't rehearse that.
So look, his statement.
Yeah,
look, it is boilerplate apology, isn't it? It is the, it is the little boy who's been caught with his hand in the cookie jar, looking at his shoes, mumbling his sorries. And I kind of think that, well, yes, you've got to let the investigation conclude, and you have. And I guess, look, we're doing our own investigation here. And the conclusion is quite simple, isn't it? That at the heart of Westminster, there has been a general arrogance that the rules did not apply or could be bent to the point of breaking. And actually, provided we all stay closely huddled together, brackets, forgive the pun, no one will know and no harm will be done. And so I think that speaks, I think it does speak to the Prime Minister. I think it speaks to the wider, the wider issue of Westminster and accountability. Because let's be honest, the vast majority of people that have attended these gatherings will not be elected officials, will they? They'll be civil servants.
This is true. Those damned unelected
bureaucrats.
Yeah. So yes, that's right. These won't be elected representatives. So I don't know whether that's a positive or a negative, because obviously politicians are probably more keenly aware of how things look to the public.
Yep.
But that's not an excuse, is it? At the end of the day, I mean, like you said, I can't think of a work environment I've worked in where it's actually considered a norm to have a drink in the office at the end of the day. But I'm welcome to accept offers of employment from them. So I just find it's a sorry mess, and again, it's not the act. It's just that it's a list that seems endless, that keeps coming out bit by bit, and it's just the conceit and the lies, and even that response from the PM. It wasn't, I got this wrong. I should have made sure that at the head of government, we should be setting the right example.
Yes.
For Downing Street to apologise to the palace, and it's interesting that was Downing Street, as in, so one building apologising to another building, when really, actually, shouldn't that be Boris Johnson apologising to Her Majesty the Queen? And obviously that's a private conversation, but it's just a point of, oh, come on, really? Do you really think that this is okay? And is this really your definition of contrition? Because it's not mine.
No, and I think the key question now is what comes next.
Yes.
And is Boris the brand damaged beyond repair? And I guess, in terms of there are three ways potentially he might go. There is somewhere in the bottom of his sock drawer, he might find a moral compass and resign. There is the option that Parliament pass a vote of no confidence in him. Or there are 55 Conservative MPs forming a queue at the door of the 1922 committee who do for him from within the party.
Yeah, isn't it 54? Sorry. But yes. So yes, there's so just to kind of cover the process parts of that. The part of Conservative Party rules is that there's a certain percentage of their sitting MPs, if a certain percentage of them submit a letter to the Backbench 22 committee in the Conservative Party, or we've lost him temporarily, to say we think basically there should be a leadership contest, the Prime Minister should resign, or the leader of the party should stand down. If enough of them submit that, then effectively a leadership contest ensues. So that's happened before. That happened in John Major's time. But we can see that we won't know what the running total of that is. We know that some MPs have submitted letters. In fact, we know that some 6 Conservative MPs have said that the Prime Minister should resign. We know that a couple of Tory peers have said that he should resign, and about 20 Tory MSPs, so members of the Scottish Parliament, have said that he should resign. So there is a momentum building, but obviously 6 is a long way from 54. So there's that possibility. That would mean that the Conservatives were still the government, the leading government, leading party, and the government in the country, but that their leader would change. The other way would be if there was a motion of no confidence passed in the House of Commons. So effectively, that's a vote of all of the MPs in the Houses of Parliament, and if that motion passes, even by one vote, then that means that that basically, if another party or another leader cannot secure basically a motion of confidence, so again a vote saying they should be the Prime Minister, even only by one vote, then after, effectively, if for example the government lost a motion of no confidence, then they've got 14 days to win a motion of no confidence, either with the existing leader or with a different one, or any other party has the same timeline. But if that doesn't happen after 14 days, then effectively what a general election is called. And I can't remember how many days that would be, but it would be a countdown to a general election. Yes, that could be how we either affect a change of government or a change of the existing leader of the Conservative Party. The question is, will that move take place from within, ahead of the local elections, or perhaps after them, depending on how they go? I'm just trying to check that we are still broadcasting, because I can't see Ian coming back, and I'm just trying to make sure that we are actually getting some comments through that, or whether that's actually my connection that's dropped. So I'm just going to check that out. So apologies while I just do that quickly. Okay, thank you, Lynn, for confirming that I'm still here. So I haven't booted Ian out, by the way. He just seems to have lost his connection. So so it's just me on my little lonesome. But we've lost Ian temporarily. He'll be back shortly. But thank you, Lynn and Tim, for confirming that. So yes, so interestingly enough, today the Liberal Democrats have released an early day motion calling for a motion of no confidence. Now, an early day motion doesn't have to be debated in the House of Parliament. Sorry, in the House of Commons. And it's up to the government to decide whether that motion is actually debated. So whether that proves to be debated or not, or whether that proves to be parliamentary petulance, is another matter entirely. In fact, Jim Callaghan, his government fell on a motion of no confidence that they lost by one vote, and that caused, if memory serves, the 1979 general election that led to Margaret Thatcher being elected as the Prime Minister. So there is a precedence of motions of no confidence causing a change of government, but will Parliament act before the Conservative Party acts? Because if it's one thing that the Conservatives seem to be good at, it's clinging to power and understanding the difference between being in power and out of power. And as much as they might hate each other at times, they seem to be more keenly aware that they hate being in opposition even more. So they air their linen in private until the point that they politically stab their prime minister in the back. So in that respect, there's kind of that element to it. We shall see actually kind of what takes place in relation to that, how that goes, and indeed whether that motion is actually discussed at all. So we shall see. But the interesting thing is, from a party politics perspective of the opposition parties, will that be something, for example, that the Labour Party rally behind? Because had they called it, it would have to actually be debated because they're Her Majesty's official opposition, because they have the power to do that. But with the Conservative Party's 80-odd seat majority in Parliament, will that motion pass or be discussed? Is the $64 million question. Would Labour support it? And I can see that Ian is now back and frantically waving to me. Oh, hang on. He seems to be back and then gone. And he's back. We have him back. We have half your face back on the screen. So welcome back, Ian. So I was just talking listeners through how a motion of no confidence works and how Backbench 1922 committee works for the Conservative Party, about whether party politics will mean that the Parliament actually leads to the reselection of a Conservative leader or another leader, forms even a minority administration with the support of the rest, or whether actually the Tory party will do for their leader, like, to be frank, they have done in the past. But an 80-seat majority is relatively, does sound numerically unassailable. You need 40 of them to basically decide to support doing the government, basically, for that to happen. So would the Lib Dems raising this get the Tories to rally behind it, and maybe Labour might not feel that they can support it because all it will do is say to the Conservatives, oh, now we've got to circle the wagons now. Look, they're coming for us. We've got to defend the leader, defend big dog, as the thing says. And we've literally got a corner of your forehead in the corner of the screen, but I think we'll live without that rather than just have you on the show instead.
Yes, we're going to, so apologies. Fundamentally, it would appear that my personal laptop at some point had become unplugged. So I ran out of juice and then obviously had to reboot and get back in. So almost like Boris Johnson, suddenly my power was fading.
Well, if you run out of juice, you just send someone up to the co-op, or in our case, McColl's, with a suitcase to get some more juice. That's apparently how it's done.
So ultimately, my view of it is I can see why the Lib Dems have raised the motion. I don't think there are enough angry Conservatives to to get that across the line. And I actually wonder whether the Labour Party would even support the motion. Because if I was a strategist, I would want to be keeping Boris Johnson in that seat for as long as I possibly could. Now, I know there are many who would say, well, whatever comes next is probably going to be worse. Well, I think from the mood music of the way the country feels at the moment, I don't think there are too many of the realistic contenders that have the taint of dishonesty and arrogance that Boris has around him at the moment. So if I was Sir Keir Starmer, I would. It is not in my interest to move Boris on.
That's an interesting strategy.
Now, if I was
keep him there because he's awful, in case they replace him with someone that's vaguely good.
Yeah,
if such a person exists in the current government.
Yeah, and let's be honest, if I was a member of Parliament and a fiscal Conservative as I am, I'd be, ultimately, it's clear to me that Boris is a dead man walking. So yeah, I'd be I'd be at the head of the queue at is it Graham Brady's door for the 1922 committee.
Yeah.
because I think there's an element of, we're either going to, the doing of Boris is either going to happen before or after the May elections. Now the risk is
Yes.
that unless somehow he can wave a magic wand, and I don't think he can, because I think he's lost control of the narrative in the mainstream media. I think the risk is that we will pay a very heavy price at the polls in May, and we will lose a lot of good Conservative councillors. And I don't know why we'd wait for that to happen before there's an element of moving Boris on.
Indeed. So that's the $64 million question. Or will the local election results be basically the final nail in the political coffin, so to speak, of, but again, like you say, there'll be many Conservative councillors that effectively will be the sacrificial lambs for the country's displeasure, and ruling governments tend to do badly in local elections. That's kind of how the population tend to express their displeasure with the ruling party. But this could be quite in the same way. Actually, last year they sailed through on what was somewhat of a euphoric vaccine wave.
Yep.
Could this year be quite, and forgive the stretching of the pun, an antidote to the vaccine euphoria that we had last year, and actually be a different kind of variant, a political variant that does for Johnson?
That's where I've got to. It is that you're absolutely right. Midterm elections never go well for sitting governments, but last May we actually did really very well. This May the tide has turned, and it really is about the behaviour of the leadership. And I don't, personally for me, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. I think the tide of popular opinion has turned, and that element of seeing Her Majesty the Queen sat alone at her husband's funeral, when the day before there's a big old lash up in the gardens of Downing Street. Optically, that couldn't look any worse.
It's just callous, isn't it? It just looks
it's
callous.
That word we keep coming back to, isn't it? It's arrogance. Oh, don't worry, it'll be all right.
Tim comments, Boris stays in. So his prediction is that Boris will stay until Sue Gray reports, and then he resigns in a show of principle. The Conservatives then move to a straightforward leadership contest with Liz Truss winning, having repaired relations with the EU. I think there's some fantastical predictions in that statement. Only time will tell which ones, but you never know. It could turn out to be true. You could be on the money, Tim.
I actually think that's not a bad shout. I think that's at the end of the day, and again, there is an element, and Boris has shown this in the past, that he gets bored.
Yes, he usually at the point that he starts getting found out for things.
Yes, so there is an element of, and again, I don't know, really good leaders have their trusted confidants and lieutenants, and if whoever Boris is prepared to listen to, and if I was sat there, I would be having the conversation with him that says, this is a way for you to go gently into the good night, and you'll, whilst it may not be the legacy that you want, you will always be the prime minister that got Brexit done. Now we can have about that, but there is an element of, but ultimately, that is,
that's the image that you
sell,
can.
isn't it?
Yes. You won third runner up in the three-legged race. You aren't you a clever boy? So yeah,
but there are things in history which will, the collapse of the Red Wall, and the 80-seat majority will forever be a numeric truth.
Yes, this is true.
So there is an element of, whilst many will believe that it was based on shifting sands and half truths. I appear to be being set about by a cat.
You are. There is indeed some feline interference in the podcast. But yeah, time will tell how long the Red wall stays blue.
Yeah, exactly. And just for the benefits
we
of the
shall see.
podcast, this is Sir Arthur Kitten Doyle.
Okay, so welcome to the podcast, Sir Arthur Kitten Doyle. Katz points out that wasn't his arrogance that got him through Brexit. Indeed, so there are times where you can, as a personality trait, bloody mindedness,
Yes.
which can be arrogance depending on your perspective. Bloody mindedness forces things to get done. So it's there are different perspectives. To be honest, if I'm honest, it's not one I agree with about Brexit, but I don't want to open that conversation now.
Yep.
So okay, we've talked about the PM, we've talked about parties enough. Shall we see what's being served up on the courts in Australia?
Well, we in the we're going to have to do this one at speed, because we really have.
Is that a high-powered serve?
It could be. So yes. So the first defending Australian Open champion to have lost their title, only having missed 2 shots, as it were. So.
Okay, well done. That's good.
Yep. No, I know. I've got to thank Nikki and the internet for that one. So Novak Djokovic, defending champion, always does well in the Australian Open, one of the world's top tennis players, arrives in Australia 5th of January, believing that he's got an exemption to go into Australia because he had tested positive for COVID in the middle of December. There appears to be some confusion at that point. He gets put into a quarantine hotel and is going to be deported. He objects or appeals the decision, and it's overturned on a technicality. The Australian immigration minister, Alex Hawke, then does I don't care about the technicalities, you're not coming in, and revokes his visa again. And then today, very early hours of this morning, he went back to court to try and challenge the decision to send him home. Lost that, and is probably touching down in Dubai just about now. Now, the interesting thing is when you look back at his defense, which is, well, I had COVID, which is why I didn't need to turn up. So most speculation says that he was at a basketball match on the 14th, front row seats, and that looks like in Serbia that became a significant spreader event. On the 17th, he does a lateral flow, it tests negative. The 16th, lateral flow, tests negative, does a PCR, sends it off. The lateral flow has tested positive. So you'd think at that point you'd be a bit circumspect. No. On the 17th, he's on social media at the children's tennis center, the Novak Djokovic Center in Serbia, handing out awards, lots of photos with children in close proximity, no mask. Later that day, his PCR test comes back positive. So a positive lateral flow, a positive PCR. So under Serbian law, he now has to self-isolate for 14 days. Except on the 18th, he's off to do a photo shoot and an interview with Equipe, which is a French sports newspaper. He later confesses that he feels that was probably an error of judgment and that he shouldn't have gone to that knowing he was positive, and that he cancelled all future events. And now he's headed back to Serbia.
Yeah, Lynn's comment is that the Aussie state seems to have cocked this up, but he does seem to be quite arrogant. It kind of seems to me that the Australian government haven't kind of showered themselves in glory, but they seem to have got to the right decision in the end. Because to me, he's demonstrated that if he actually had COVID, he doesn't follow COVID regulations. And if your immigration policy is that you should either be vaccinated or you need to follow COVID regulations, that kind of like, do you want someone going on television that's demonstrating that you don't follow COVID regulations? No.
Yeah. And it's interesting because Australia, again, not being an expert in Australian politics, but each of the different states has an element of self-governance.
Yes, they're a
So,
federal system.
yeah.
Yeah.
So in the cricket, England was supposed to play the last test in Perth. I can't remember which one it was. It Western Australia. Basically said, well, if you want to come, from Queensland to Perth, you're going to have to self-isolate for 10 days. To which they said, well, we can't play a game of cricket then. Where interestingly, the government in Tasmania said, well, you can come to Hobart and you won't need to self-isolate at all. Now, it turns out it was a dreadful result for England, as obviously they went to Hobart and got absolutely stuffed. So it would have been better not to have played at all. But I think for me, that the whole thing with Djokovic is that, and it touches a little bit on that first story, isn't there? There's an arrogance. Well, I don't need to get vaccinated. I'm in my early mid-30s. I'm fit. I'm strong. I'm a professional athlete. Why do I need to bother? And then when the rules say, well, it's not about you, it's about the rules, tries to find a loophole and just has a glaring arrogance in terms of, I knew I was positive, but I went and did a photo shoot.
Yeah, yeah, to me it's the either way you look at it, if your country's board measure is that someone should either be vaccinated or demonstrate that they've recently had COVID, okay, fine, maybe cross on one, tick on the other, but either he did have COVID at that point and didn't follow the regulations where he was.
Yep.
Or he didn't really have COVID at that point, and that's why he didn't follow the regulations. Obviously, we don't have access to the medical information that would say it kind of either way. But to me,
no, he's been very clear. I
yeah,
had COVID.
he's been very yes. Well,
I knew I had a positive PCR, but I did a couple more gigs before I then decided I'd probably better cancel the rest.
Yeah, then to me that says then for the public good, you need to not be in a situation where you're unable to do that. Yep. And Australia is one of the countries in the world that has some of the most stringent COVID regulations in the world. I wouldn't necessarily say that they're ones that I would like to see enacted in this country, but nonetheless, you go to another country, you obey by their rules, you obey by their laws. So it was a strange thing to see old friend Nigel Farage riding in to defend an Eastern European getting into a country where their own control of their own borders said that he shouldn't.
And that is, I think, probably a wild and wacky place to end today's podcast. You've been listening to the Pompey Politics Podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
And I've been Simon Sansbury. Don't forget to join us next week, which, unless the government delay the decision again, we'll be welcoming the campaigners from Let's Stop Aquin to discuss the Kwasi Kwarteng's decision about whether to allow Aquin to dig a trench all the way up through Portsmouth and call load chaos in order to bury a power cable. So join us next week, 6:27. Thanks very much.